All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today we're diving deep into the 2022 Texas State Water Plan. And let me tell you, it's a real eye-opener when you consider how many more folks are going to be calling Texas home in the future. We're talking a whole lot of new neighbors, but maybe not enough water to go around.
Yeah, it paints a pretty stark picture when you look at the numbers.
So let's break it down. The plan basically lays out this scenario, right? Texas in the not-so-distant future. Picture this. Mega cities popping up left and right with more people moving in every day. But here's the catch. Our water sources, they ain't exactly growing at the same pace.
It's a classic case of supply and demand. And in this case, demand is projected to outstrip supply in a big way.
Okay, so we've got this population boom on the horizon. And the plan actually puts a number on it. 51.5 million Texans by 2070.
That's more than double what we have today. It's a staggering increase.
Double the people, but the water's not going to magically double itself, right?
Exactly.
So what happens when you throw a mega drought into the mix? You know, one of those droughts for the record books.
Well, the plan actually modeled that scenario. They looked at what would have happened if the drought of record had hit back in 2020. The numbers are pretty sobering. Texas would have been short a whopping 3.1 million acre feet of water every single year.
Well, hold on, back up a sec. For those of us who don't speak acre foot, can you break that down? Like, how much water are we talking here?
Picture a football field. Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Now imagine that football field filled with water, a mile high.
Okay, that's a lot of water.
That's 1 acre foot. Now multiply that by 3.1 million.
Yikes, that's a whole lot of water we'd be missing. All right, so fast forward 2070, when all those new folks have moved in. Does it get better or worse?
Sadly, it gets worse. That shortage could balloon to almost 7 million acre feet a year.
Okay, so we're talking millions of acre feet, billions of gallons. But let's get real here. What does that actually mean for the average Texan? Like, how does that translate into everyday life?
Well, the plan connects those water shortages to some pretty serious economic consequences.
So it's going to hit us in the pocketbook.
It could, in a big way. They estimate that if that 2020 drought had actually happened, Texas would have lost a staggering $110 billion in income.
$110 billion.
That's right. And we're not just talking about abstract economic figures here. We're talking about people's jobs. Over 600,000 jobs could have been lost in a single year.
Wow. So this isn't just about running out of water to drink. We're talking families, businesses, entire communities feeling the pain. Water scarcity equals economic disaster. Got it. But hold on a sec. Haven't droughts always been a part of life in Texas? Like, it's practically a rite of passage, right?
You're not wrong. Drought is woven into the very fabric of Texas history. In fact, the plan actually uses the 1950s drought as a kind of benchmark for planning.
The 1950s? That's a long time ago. It must have been a real doozy.
It was, but here's the thing. Recent droughts have shown us that things can get even worse in the 1950s. Think of the Colorado Basin drought from 2007 to 2016. That one really threw a wrench in things.
So it's like planning for a hurricane, but instead of wind and rain, it's dryness and dust storms. And those dust storms are getting stronger, huh?
Exactly. The folks who put this plan together, they weren't just looking back at history. They were looking ahead at a future with potentially even more intense drought.
So it's like they're prepping for a super drought. Kind of scary, but also smart. All right, so we've established Texas is going to need a whole lot of more water in the coming decades. But before we dive into how they plan to find it, let's break down where all the water goes right now. Like, who are the biggest water guzzlers in Texas?
Well, the plan breaks water use down into a few main categories. You've got your cities and towns, what they call municipal use. Then there's manufacturing, agriculture, which uses a ton for irrigation, livestock, mining. Even power plants need a lot of water. Right now, irrigation is the biggest user by far.
So water in all those crops and fields is sucking up most of the water. Makes sense. Texas is a big agricultural state. But if our cities are growing so fast, that could change.
You got it. By 2060, get this, municipal demand is predicted to take the top spot.
So picture this. In a few decades, our cities will be using more water than all the farms and ranches combined. That's a pretty big shift. Does the plan take that into account?
Absolutely. They use some pretty sophisticated computer models to project water use. And get this, they even factor in things like federal water efficiency standards for appliances.
So even things like new washing machines and dishwashers play a role in those long-term projections. So even if we all switch to those low-flow shower heads, it might not be enough to offset the demand of those mega cities, huh?
That's why the plan goes beyond just conserving water. It looks at increasing our supply. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So, where exactly does Texas get its water from? Is it all cowboys and wells out here, or is it more to the story?
Well, we do love our wells, but Texas actually uses two main sources of water. We pull water from the surface, like rivers and lakes, or reservoirs, as we like to call them down here, and we tap into underground sources called aquifers.
So, surface water and groundwater sounds straightforward enough, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just finding a river and sticking a straw in it, right?
You're catching on. The plan makes a key distinction between water availability and existing supply. Think of it like this. You might have a huge lake full of water, but if you don't have the pipes and pumps to get that water to where it's needed, it's not really part of your usable supply.
So, it's not just about how much water is out there, it's about how much we can actually access and use. And that depends on infrastructure, right?
Exactly. And here's another wrinkle. The plan projects that Texas's surface water availability will actually decrease by 3% by 2070.
Hold up, our surface water is actually shrinking.
That's right, largely due to sedimentation in our reservoirs.
So, we've got more people, less surface water, and dwindling groundwater. This is starting to sound like a recipe for disaster.
That's why this plan is so important. They're trying to get ahead of this problem before it turns into a full-blown crisis. And that's where their solutions come into play. But we'll have to save those for the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into the 2022 Texas State Water Plan. You know, when we were prepping for this episode, one thing that really stood out to me was how much emphasis they put on protecting those really sensitive water sources. It's like they're trying to balance the need for more water with the need to keep our environment healthy.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. So, how do they walk that line?
Well, they get really specific in the plan. They actually pinpoint 5 river and stream segments that they recommend protecting under the Texas Water Code.
5 specific streams. What makes them so special?
These aren't just any old creeks. They've got unique ecosystems, home to all sorts of plants and animals that depend on them. We're talking about places like Alameda Creek, Black Cypress Bayou, Black Cypress Creek, Pecan Bayou, and Terlingua Creek. These spots are pretty unique, and the plan recognizes that.
So, it's like putting a fence around a beautiful park to make sure nobody messes it up. But if they're protecting these streams, does that mean they can't build reservoirs on them?
You got it. Protecting these segments means no damming them up to create reservoirs. It's a trade-off, for sure. Texas needs more water storage, but it's got to be done in a way that doesn't wreck these sensitive ecosystems.
Makes sense. Got to find that sweet spot. So they're saying hands off to these special streams, but they're also recommending new places to build reservoirs, right? How do they decide where those should go?
It's a pretty careful process. They look at things like the geology of the area, the potential impact on the environment, and of course, how much water the reservoir could hold. It's all about making sure we get the most bang for our buck, so to speak.
So it's not just about building a giant bathtub in the middle of nowhere. It's about being strategic and thoughtful about where those reservoirs go. Okay, let's shift gears for a sec and talk about drought. Because, let's face it, it's the elephant in the room when it comes to Texas water. The plan goes deep into the history of dry spells in our state, doesn't it?
It does. Drought is a recurring theme in Texas history. It's like a never-ending story.
And the plan uses the 1950s drought as a benchmark, which is kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah, the 1950s, that was a rough one. But here's the thing. More recent droughts, like the one we saw in the Colorado Basin from 2007 to 2016, are showing us that things can get even drier than the 1950s.
So it's like those super hurricanes we keep hearing about. The droughts are getting stronger too.
That's a good way to put it, and the planners are taking this trend seriously. They're not just looking at what happened in the past, they're factoring in the possibility of those mega droughts when making their recommendations.
It's like preparing for a 100-year flood, but instead of water, it's a lack of it. So how do they even measure the severity of a drought? Is it just about how much rain we get, or is there more to it?
It's definitely more than just counting raindrops. They use something called the Palmer Drought Severity Index.
The Palmer what now?
The Palmer Drought Severity Index, it's a mouthful, I know. But basically, it takes into account things like temperature, soil moisture, and evaporation rates. It gives you a much more complete picture of how dry things really are.
So it's like a drought report card with grades for different aspects of dryness. I bet Texas hasn't been getting straight A's lately.
No, not so much. And the plan doesn't shy away from the economic impact of these droughts either. They even cite a 2011 report that estimated agricultural losses in Texas from one drought at a whopping $7.62 billion.
Ouch. That's a lot of hay that didn't get made. It really hits home how much we depend on water, not just for our gardens, but for our entire economy.
Absolutely, and it underscores why this plan is so important. It's about protecting our livelihoods, our communities, and our way of life here in Texas.
Okay, so we know how they measure drought, but how do they actually go about planning for it? It's not like they can just order up a few rainstorms.
They wish. But seriously, the plan relies on a whole bunch of different data sources. We're talking historical rainfall records, stream flow measurements, groundwater levels, you name it. They also consider different drought indices, each with its own focus, like how drought affects crops versus how it affects reservoirs.
So they're crunching a lot of numbers trying to understand the drought beast from all angles. But is there anything they can actually do about it?
There is. The plan is all about action. It emphasizes regional drought planning and response, recognizing that different parts of Texas face unique challenges. They've got 16 regional water planning groups, each responsible for monitoring conditions in their area and coming up with customized solutions.
So it's like a decentralized drought fighting force, with each region having its own specialized unit.
That's a great way to put it. And each region even developed its own drought contingency plan, outlining specific actions to take depending on how severe the drought gets.
So it's not just a statewide plan sitting on a shelf. It's a living, breathing document that gets put into action at the local level. That's pretty cool. But all this planning and data analysis sounds pretty heavy. Is there any room for creativity in this plan?
Absolutely. The plan isn't just about doom and gloom. It's full of innovative ideas for tackling Texas's water challenges. We're not just talking about the usual conservation measures. They're exploring cutting-edge technologies and strategies that could revolutionize how we manage water in the future.
Ooh, now you're talking my language. So what are some of these game-changing solutions they've cooked up?
Well, for starters, the plan dedicates a whole section to conservation, emphasizing that saving water is just as important as finding new sources. But they're not just telling people to take shorter showers. They've got a whole arsenal of conservation programs, initiatives, and best practices that are designed to make a real impact.
So it's not just about individual responsibility. They're looking at systemic changes that promote water efficiency on a larger scale. Give me an example.
Well, they're big on data-driven decision-making. They even conducted a massive study of water conservation programs across the state, collecting data from over 170 water utilities to figure out which conservation measures are actually working. It's all about moving beyond anecdotal evidence and getting hard numbers on what actually saves water.
So they're taking a scientific approach to conservation, which makes sense. But data alone doesn't save water, right? Who's actually implementing these conservation programs?
That's where the Texas Water Development Board, or TWDB for short, comes in. They're like the conservation quarterbacks, administering a whole bunch of programs aimed at reducing water use and making sure every drop counts.
So they're the ones calling the plays, making sure the conservation game plan is executed properly. But even with the best conservation efforts, Texas is still going to need more water, right? Especially with all those new folks moving in. What's the plan say about finding new sources?
They've got some pretty bold ideas. We're talking over 2,400 specific projects designed to boost our water supply, with a total estimated price tag of $80 billion.
$80 billion. That's like building a water park on the moon. So what kind of mega projects are we talking about here?
They run the gamut from big to bigger. The plan proposes building 23 new major reservoirs, which would add almost 900,000 acre-feet of water to our supply each year.
Okay, now that's what I call thinking big. But aren't reservoirs kind of old school? Is there anything more innovative in the plan?
You bet. They're even looking at things like seawater desalination.
Hold up, desalination. Like turning salt water into drinking water. That sounds straight out of Star Trek.
It's not science fiction anymore. Desalination plants are popping up all over the world, and the plan recognizes that they could be a game changer for Texas, especially along the coast.
So they're not afraid to think outside the water box. I like their style. But hold on, desalination is super expensive, right?
Yeah.
Can Texas really afford to build these futuristic water factories?
That's the million-dollar question, or should I say, the $80 billion question. Financing is a major hurdle, and the plan acknowledges that. But they've laid out a multi-pronged approach to funding these ambitious projects, drawn on everything from state and federal funds to local bonds and even private investment.
So they're basically throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this problem, huh? It's a good thing we're not short on sinks in Texas.
Right. And they're not just relying on new projects either. They also stress the importance of maintaining and improving our existing water infrastructure. Think of it like giving our water system a major tune-up.
So it's not just about building more. It's about making sure what we already have is working at peak performance. That's smart. But what about all that water we lose to leaks and inefficiencies? Does the plan address that?
They've got that covered too. They're big on water loss audits and leak detection technology, encouraging water utilities to crack down on those wasteful drips and leaks. It's all about squeezing every last drop out of our precious water resources.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from drought planning to desalination to leak detection. My brain is feeling a bit like a saturated sponge right now. But before we move on, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the consequences of inaction. What happens if we just ignore this plan and hope for the best?
While hoping for rain might not be the best strategy in a state as prone to drought as Texas, the plan lays out some pretty dire scenarios if we don't get our act together. Think about it. By 2070, if we don't take action, a quarter of the population could face severe water shortages during a major drought.
A quarter of the population.
That's right. Millions of people without enough water to drink, shower, or flush their toilets. That's not just inconvenient, it's a public health crisis waiting to happen.
And it's not just about basic needs either, right?
Nope. Water scarcity would ripple through our economy, affecting everything from agriculture to manufacturing to tourism. The plan estimates that a severe drought in 2070 could cost us a whopping $150 billion in lost economic activity.
Wow, $150 billion. That's like the entire state of Texas going on a forced water diet. So this isn't just some abstract problem for future generations to deal with. This is affecting us right now, and it's only going to get worse if we don't act.
You hit the nail on the head. This plan is a wake-up call for all Texans. It's telling us that we can't afford to take water for granted anymore. We need to start thinking about it as the precious resource it is and manage it accordingly.
So this plan is more than just a technical document. It's a call to action, a roadmap to a more water-secure future for Texas. And I, for one, am glad they wrote it.
And we're back, still plumbing the depths of the 2022 Texas State Water Plan. I gotta say, this deep dive has really given me a new appreciation for, well, water. It's easy to take it for granted, right? Especially when you can just turn on the tap and it's there.
Exactly. But this plan really lays out the stakes. It's not just about keeping our lawns green. It's about making sure Texas has enough water to keep growing, to keep prospering.
You know, one of the things that really struck me was how the plan connects water to economic growth. Like, it explicitly states that water security is essential for a strong economy.
It makes perfect sense when you think about it. Agriculture, manufacturing, tech industries, even energy production, they all need water to function.
And the plan really doesn't mince words when it comes to the economic risks of water scarcity.
Yeah, we're talking billions in potential losses, potentially hundreds of thousands of jobs lost.
It's a stark reminder that water is not just an environmental issue, it's an economic one too.
And we've already seen hints of this in recent years, right? With those restrictions on outdoor watering and businesses having to cut back.
It's a wake-up call for sure, a reminder that this isn't some far-off problem, it's affecting us right now.
And the plan also acknowledges that climate change is likely to make things even more complicated.
Yeah, rising temperatures, change in rainfall patterns, more extreme weather events. It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Talk about a challenge. But thankfully, the plan isn't just about identifying problems, it's about finding solutions. And there are a lot of them, but how do they actually make these ideas happen? Put them into practice.
Implementation is key. And the plan recognizes that Texas is a big, diverse state with different regions facing unique challenges. So it takes a collaborative approach, bringing together everyone involved: state agencies, regional planning groups, local governments, water utilities, even individual citizens.
So it's a team effort, a real Texas-sized collaboration.
That's a great way to put it. And the plan outlines specific roles and responsibilities for each group.
For example,
Well, state agencies like the Texas Water Development Board, they're tasked with developing policies and regulations that promote water conservation. They're also responsible for providing financial assistance for water projects, helping communities fund those big ticket items like new reservoirs or desalination plants.
so they're kind of like the water bank, making sure the money flows where it's needed. Makes sense. But what about those regional planning groups we talked about earlier? What do they do?
They're the boots on the ground, so
Okay.
to speak. They're the ones making sure that water management efforts are tailored to the specific needs of their regions.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. They're adapting the plan to fit the local context.
That's the idea. And it also recognizes the importance of public education and outreach, because informed citizens are key to making all this work.
So it's not just about following the rules. It's about understanding why those rules are in place.
Exactly. It's about empowering Texans to make smart choices about water use and to advocate for policies that protect this vital resource.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but if there's one thing I'm taking away from this plan, it's that water is a public good. It belongs to all of us. And we all have a responsibility to manage it wisely, both for ourselves and for future generations.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This plan is a roadmap to a future where Texas continues to thrive, even as we face the challenges of a growing population and a changing climate.
A roadmap we all need to be following. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive, but we hope you'll keep exploring this vital topic, because the future of water in Texas depends on all of us. Thanks for joining us.